Hey, Vicky, can you hear me? Test my mic. Can y'all hear me? Testing to make sure I'm clear and I can be heard. Can anyone hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Vicky, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Awesome, because yesterday I had all kind of issues. Thank you.
You have a key that she handed right there.
Oh my.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2:30. And since we're beginning
Hello.
in the afternoon, I will begin on time and not give anybody any wiggle room because we have a lot of content. So good afternoon, everybody. Okay, because we still have people joining, I will definitely give 1 or 2 more minutes. Vicky, if you don't mind watching the participant list, if you see someone waiting in the lobby, let them in. My
Okay.
name is Tamara. I am happy to do this training with y'all because today is D-Day. Well, tomorrow is D-Day, but it is the end of ESGCV. What does that mean? That means monitoring, closeout, reporting, getting y'all files together. And some of y'all seen me already, and we got through that process, and some of y'all have not. So for the ones who did not have a training, before I showed up to their door, I am sorry, but we got through it. And for the ones who are getting this training, you are ahead of the game. All right, y'all, give you 1 more minute and we'll get started.
Fast.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I'm getting some echo. I appreciate if everyone will mute their phones, mute their mics, mute their computers. This is a lot of good content. I would like everybody to get it clearly. I might have to go and mute them bad feedback, so just give me a second. I'm going to try to mute some of the mics. Okay, I'm going to mute everyone because I'm not sure where the feedback is coming from and what's going to happen when it's time for Q&A. You'll have to unmute yourself. If you're unable to unmute yourself, just drop a message in the chat box and we'll unmute you. So I'm going to mute everyone. Okay, much better. Well, everyone's muted, so you have to use the chat box. Right.
Oh, you talking about the USDA?
Yeah, but then
Not everyone is muted. Please mute your mics. I thought I mute all. Please mute your mics, or your phones, or your computers. Thank you. All right, just a little bumpy start to the technology, but that's understandable. We are in the age of technology. I want to give a start off first to making sure I introduce my team. If their cameras are on, they can wave as I call their name. If not, then you hopefully you know how they look. We do have some new people on our team. You might have received an email or two from them, or you might have seen them when they came to your site. So as I call your name, please just say hi, wave your hand so they can see who you are. Everyone on this call should know Faye McCall, Faye. And then we have Vicky Palfrey. We also have with us Sharonda. Latoya is one of the new individuals on our team. Some of you all have met her when she came to your shelter for an inspection. And we also have Fred. Fred is not
Hello.
in today. Thank you, Sharonda. Fred is not in today, but you will get to meet him, if not soon, very, very soon, or you probably already received an email from him. Today's office hours session is very important. So if you see someone not on this call that you know should be here, let them know they need to join on or go back and watch the recording. This will help you get through the more upcoming monitoring and grant closeout process if you haven't done that before. Our objectives: attendees of the federal grant office hour sessions will receive valuable information to enhance their management of federal grants program and improvement of program outcomes. Each session will cover different topics. So that's the general overview of all of our office hours. Today's session, we're really focusing on making sure you get through the monitoring process and also have some processes in place at your agency for internal monitorings. Outline, we will go through the monitoring steps. So in our monitoring process, what steps should you expect from MHC? We'll go over universal regulation requirements, monitoring tools, mainly looking at ESG and ESG-CV. We did not overlook HOPWA, but we have so much content, we did not have time to add those tools today. We will meet up with our HOPWA agencies later to provide those tools. And Faye McCall will go over the closeout information. As I mentioned, we do have a lot of content and we want to make room for questions and answers. So I will try not to skip through things too quickly, but we do want to make enough time. Monitoring overview: Mississippi Home Corporation, the state agency for the distribution of ESG, HOPWA, and home funds. I don't manage home funds, but that's one of the programs that we have. Is required to monitor each program function and activity funded by ESG, ESG-CV, HOPWA, and HOPWA-CV award. Monitoring is not limited to a one-time event, but it's rather an ongoing process. We look at the quality of ESG, ESG-CV funded programs, performance over the life and the whole program implementation that you had, the whole life of the program. We're looking at a comprehensive view from the way you manage staff that work with the program, policies and procedures, and the way you carry out these projects and making sure they are in line with the federal regulations, the state requirements, and your own agency policy. The goal of this process is to assist ESG, ESG-CV, HOPWA, HOPWA-CV funded programs with improving performance, increasing capacity, and avoiding or remedying instance of non-compliance. MHC grantees are required to participate in monitoring and reporting on the performance of their funded programs, including those impacted by direct service provider or by contractors. So we have some agencies that provide services directly, and maybe in some part of your program, you might contract with some case managers or with some, I don't know, trainers. Those contracts has to also follow with the federal requirements and regulations. MHC grantees are expected to make all program records available to MHC for and to participate in regular monitoring events. The office hour sessions, as I mentioned, will outline MHC approach to monitoring. We have a specific approach that we try to take. Sometimes we, may come off that path a little bit, but this is the structural way that we handle all of our monitorings. When it comes to monitoring, we have our head boss, which is going to be HUD and HUD OIG. They monitor and audit oversight of MHC. But it don't stop there. HUD also, MHC monitors the grantees, and sometimes HUD goes over to your building as well and provide monitoring and oversight to the grantees, internal monitorings and audits and oversight. So What that means right there, we monitor y'all, but we also have our own internal, at MHC, we have our own internal audits and oversight. And finally, a sub-recipient's local program implementation. You implement the program. Now, all because HUD and OIG is all the way up here and they monitor MHC. It does not mean that they will not show up at your door. They have the rights for the next 10 years to come and pop up and say they want to see a program that you implemented that was funded with federal dollars. Hopefully you don't get knocked on that door for that type of audit, but it can happen. So you must be prepared. Several states, I think I mentioned this to several people, OIG is monitoring ESGCB. Several states were selected. Thank the Lord, Mississippi was not selected, but when OIG visited those states, they were going down to the subrecipient level and meeting with the subrecipients and looking at the subrecipient's file. So when you get your files together, you're not just getting it for us, but you're also getting ready for HUD in case they decide to select you for monitoring if it ever gets to that point. Unfortunately, all of the COVID funds are going to be looked at more strictly than regular funds because they were special funds. So be prepared for that, okay? Processes of our monitoring, process and outcomes. When Mississippi Home Corporation do a monitor, first of all, ESGCB, everyone will be monitored. And all of our programs, we are required to provide monitoring, but sometimes we select certain agencies before the end of the program year because of certain things. It's called a risk assessment. We are required to do a risk assessment on every agency, determine level of risk. That's the first thing we do. Then we go through the steps of monitoring. Next, we have the monitoring preparation, monitoring notification, monitoring report, and then the response from subrecipients. Let's look at the outcomes. When we do our monitoring and we come out to visit you, we will have a couple of things. One, you may have a clear monitoring, happy face, right? No concerns or findings identified, none at all. When we give you your monitoring report back, it will identify a certain regulation, and then we will say none if there's no findings or concern. No validation or additional information on program policies or procedures are required. Concern, you're not too happy, but you're not sad. You have some concerns, so we might need more information. A concerning condition identified, what that means is that it can be corrected. It may result in a violation of the program, but we are not sure yet. So we have concerns and we have questions, and you can definitely provide more information as we walk through that process. Finally, you might have a result of a finding on your monitoring outcome. A finding is a violation of the program regulation or program requirements. When you have a finding, it's because you're literally violating a federal program. And 100% of the time when I write, when you have a finding identified, we are attaching the regulation that's being considered or identified as not being met. Now, if you have additional documentation that proves that you did meet that regulation, you will always have time to provide that information and walk us through that process. Okay, so let's go through the process of our monitoring. Risk assessment. Consistent with HUD requirements detailed in the CPD monitoring handbook and the CPD notice 14-04, MHC conducts a risk assessment on entities implementing federal funded activities to identify the risk of fraud, waste, abuse, and non-compliance. The risk assessment have a few triggers. One, turnover of key staff. That's a trigger on the risk assessment. Two, frequent and multiple concerns on the request for cash documentation or slow to provide the documentation on your request for cash. Three, Budgets more than, I have a dollar sign because it depending on the program. If it's ESG CV, if you got funded more than 700,000, then you're automatically at a high risk. ESG has a lower amount because we usually don't give out that much funds on ESG because of the small budget amount. 4, delayed documentation, as I mentioned, and 5, delayed in request for cash. So if you're an agency that only do your budgets or your requests once a year, you're automatically going to be at a high risk. We recommend that you provide a request for cash once a month. MAC will complete a risk assessment worksheet for each grantee. The risk assessment is measured on a 100-point scale, whereby each grantee is assigned points for various factors, like the factors I mentioned, and are summed up to total score. So it can tell us if you're high risk, medium risk, or low risk. Our risk assessment tool, here's a sample of it. It's not available on our website, but this is the basic information we ask on our risk assessment tool. I'll be happy to post that on our website, but it does change based on if we see that any consistent concerns or growing concerns we have on the program level. Monitoring prep. After we finish our risk assessment on all of the agencies and we've identified agencies that should be prioritized for monitoring, the next thing we do is we start preparing for the monitoring. We determine the type of monitoring that needs to be conducted. Is it going to be on-site or is it going to be desk? As long as HUD allows us to do a desk monitoring, that's what we're going to use for some agencies because of the work that we've seen does not need, or maybe the capacity seems to be so sufficient that we don't have to do a site monitoring. Desk monitoring is mainly for like smaller grants for agencies who probably don't have a whole lot of funds moving through. They are most appropriate for desk monitoring. But when it comes to ESG CV, most likely you're going to get a site monitoring. The areas that will be reviewed is also being concerned or looked at, and the monitoring checklist to be used. So when we look at the areas to be reviewed, not everybody got funded in every category. Some agencies just got shelter, some agencies got home intervention and rapid rehousing. So depending on what you got your funds on, that's how you know what areas need to be reviewed. We also conduct a spot review of requests for cash and in data system to identify areas of concern. So before we even go to you, we have done a spot review on your request for cash. We have identified maybe some consistent areas that need to be addressed. We're probably pulling up some information in HMIS so we can identify where we need to focus on in our monitoring. We identify any records that will be reviewed during the monitoring and determine which documents will be requested. Grantees are encouraged to review the following throughout the implementation of their program to avoid a monitoring that results in a concern or finding. So throughout your project year, you need to review your program agreement, that's your contract, and additional grant modification. You will hear me say this a lot throughout this presentation. Everything must line up. And your program agreement, your grant modification, if the budget is one thing, and we come and monitor you and your internal budget saying something completely different, that's a concern. Yes, everything must line up. You must also look at your monthly and annual performance report. Are you meeting set goals? We collect your monthly data, so you need to look at that to make sure you're reaching the goals that you set for your agency to reach. Number 3, request for cash forms. Are all request reimbursements eligible? You should be looking at that internally. Reasonable and appropriate. This is a quote from HUD. Eligible, reasonable, and appropriate. Some things might be eligible, but not reasonable and appropriate. So you need to look at that. Do you have the needed supported document that meets the state federal requirement? I was kindly informed once again last week by our HUD TA that a pay stub alone is not sufficient documentation when it comes to staff. You must always have timesheet. You must always have contact logs, appropriate supporting documents, and those things must be signed. That's just one example. All of the reimbursements must be attached to appropriate documentation, and just a payment receipt is not enough. You need more than that for appropriate documentation. And all because your request for cash was approved doesn't mean that we won't find something on your monitoring. So you might want to go, before we come to you, you might want to go and recheck everything that was requested and make sure your documentation is appropriate. 4, always look at the written standards. Get to know the federal regulations and your own internal policies. Make sure, once again, does it all line up? The federal regulations must be and your written standards, is that in line? And then the things that you're doing, is that in line with what you said you will do? Number 6, do you have a clear separation in your grants? If you have multiple grants, I prefer personally that you have a bank account for each one, but if you don't have the capacity to do that, then you need to have clear separation in your documentation and your processes of those different grants. Next is monitoring notification. Can y'all still see my screen? Yeah, there we go. Monitoring notification. Once the date of the monitoring is determined, an intent to monitor letter and email will be sent to you before we pop up or before the monitoring. Now, if we feel that something very wrong is going on, then we might just pop up. But for all intentions, we really prefer and will send out a notification and you know we're coming ahead of time. The letter will include the following: date of the monitoring event and a statement indicating whether the review will occur remotely or on site, activities and areas to be reviewed, a request to determine a request to identify, I don't know why I said it like that, applicant lists from HMIS, a list of requested documentation, additional documentation may be requested. Here is an example, it's very small of what you will receive. This is to my left, it is the letter you receive, is just basically your grant number, your agency address, and it lists the dates. And then it follows up with an email. In the email, you get more specific information where we request your policy and procedures. We request a list of clients that's been served. Now, keep in mind, you should be pulling a list from HMIS. And we'll talk about this a little later, but everyone that's in HMIS goes into a HUD report. Therefore, HUD and us are assuming if they're in rapid rehousing in HMIS, it's because you have determined that they are homeless and documentation is available for that, regardless of whether you house them or not. If they're in rapid rehousing in HMIS, it's because you know they're homeless. You're not waiting to verify homelessness. That's been done before you enter them into the rapid rehousing program. Other things that we may request, as I mentioned, program policies and procedures, and we'll talk about that a little later. Depending on the program being monitored, shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, TBRA, STIRMU, PHP, or supportive services, we may need to select a sample of clients' file to review. All clients, as I said, enter HMIS as a housing service program. It's reported by HUD as receiving services, so they need to have appropriate documentation. The number of client files subject to review is based on a complete list, okay? And I'm calling the complete list here, all unique clients, and then we get a sample from there. Here's an example of how we determine the sample. So when we run the report in HMIS, sometimes we ask you for the report, especially if you're a DV agency and you're not using HMIS, I ask you for a de-identified report out of your system. From there, we collect a sample size. So if you serve 50 clients, we're looking at about 10 files. If you serve 100 clients, we might be looking at about 20 files. More than 100 clients, more about 30 or more files. And that's how we determine the sample size. However, it's not limited. If we check 10 files and we find 3 files with errors, then we might check an additional 10. So now we're up to 20. And that's how it goes. If we check your 10 files and all your files are good, then we probably won't check no more. Monitoring report. At the conclusion of the monitoring, MAC shall, I don't know why it's shall, sorry, notify key personnel in writing of findings and concerns, as well as the next steps in the monitoring process. For each concern, the grantee will be provided with an opportunity to correct any misunderstandings. So we're not accusing anything yet until you can provide us more information. Or B, grantees will have the opportunity to respond to all findings. For each finding, corrective actions will be identified if corrective actions are available. Grantees monitoring report will identify the date by which findings and/or concerns must be addressed. Whenever possible, we will definitely work with you to get things cleared up. So what to expect in your monitoring response? If a written response is not provided, so after we identify concerns, if a written response is not provided by the date identified in your monitoring report, we will issue a non-compliance letter requesting you to respond within 15 days. MHC may take one or more of the following actions whilst waiting, keyword, whilst waiting on corrective actions to be completed, or if grantee fails to correct identified deficiencies. 1, we may or will withhold reimbursements until findings are addressed. 2, we will request the repayment of previous reimbursements for disallowable costs. And 3, wholly or partly suspend or terminate the award. We never had to do that. We don't want to. So please respond to corrective actions by the date. And if you still have concerns or need clarification on what you need to do, reach out to us. Agencies will receive a final monitoring at the closeout of their grant. MAC closeout report will also include a clearance letter from all monitoring. So if you have multiple monitorings throughout the year, you have one final clearance letter. Agencies that have not responded, cleared, or any identified concerns or findings will not be able to successfully close out their program. It is not our intention, unless we really have to close out or I guess terminate contracts. We do work with agency to correct any concerns or to show them what documentation is needed so they can provide that information. Some documentation is supposed to be collected at the beginning of the program. We'll talk about that a little later. So you can't go back and, find this documentation. But I'm going to talk about that a little later. Before we move forward, the next set of slides, we're going over a specific documentation. But before we move forward, I do want to let you know of major concerns that was identified by a HUD training the other week that has been consistent among different states that you might want to look out for. 1, not being appropriate with confidential information. OIG has fined different agencies for releasing confidential information inappropriately. And how that happened was they sent clients' name via email. We're not supposed to do that. If I ask you, even if MAC asks you to send us some information, you need to, as much as possible, encrypt your email, lock your email, especially with domestic violence agencies, block out that client's name if you're using your regular email. Other than that, you should be using HMIS. Be careful with identifying information. when that thing is being sent. Even if HUD asks you, be careful how you send them that information, because sometimes they are phishing to see how you respond with clients identifying information. The other thing people were getting in trouble for was the FMR, rent reasonableness. When the rent reasonableness was not completed or the fair market rent was not completed, agencies were going and completing it after they moved someone in, and they were dated. So OIG found several companies in trouble for the date on their FMR and rent reasonableness was September, but the client moved in back in August. The FMR rent reasonableness should be done before signing of the lease, right? Other thing, homeless certification. If that's not dated, if it's just blank, that's been a concern. If it's dated after you house someone, then they wasn't homeless. You have to be careful with those different things. And they do not want you to backdate any document. So if you forgot to date something, you have to put today's date and then write a note on the side saying, due to whatever circumstances, this document was not dated. I don't know how they know who backdating what, but they were finding that stuff out. And I don't want you to get in trouble for simple things like that. Make sure your documents are collected when they should be collected at the appropriate time. And if for some reason it was not, go back, collect that information, and provide an explanation on why it wasn't collected in a specific time. You can identify this stuff before we come. And you can do that by doing internal monitoring. So the next set of slides that we'll go through will give you some tools you can use for your internal monitoring and go over the monitoring prep to prepare your agency. First, we'll go over universal federal program requirements. There are several universal program requirements. Hawkwood ESG is going to be the same. You need to research, if you haven't read yet, 2 CFR Part 200. That's going to be all your financial requirements for nonprofits or any agencies that administer federal funds. It's called 2 CFR Part 200. It really does with the admin and the financial responsibilities. This includes 1, all purchases must be documented through a disposition form. Our first office hours, we discussed the disposition form. If you purchase equipment, now this is not your pen and your papers, but if you purchase equipment, which is allowable, you must document that on a disposition form. We'll talk about that. We'll also go over copying of checks on non-satisfactory documentation to support reimbursement requests. If you purchase something, we need an invoice, not just a copy of a check where you purchase a computer. I need to see what the computer costs and then a copy of a check. You must also be clear documentation in separation of grants. We talked about that. Timesheets must meet OMB requirements. If you look at 200, look up the OMB requirements. It's also in 576 Part 100. Timesheets must have clearly separation of duties. It must be signed by the staff member and by the supervisor, and it must be supported with activities or activity logs. Your project budget, expenditure, and services must line up. I will say this over and over again. It must line up. And finally, all projects must be allowable, reasonable, appropriate, in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200 and 2 CFR 576.100. So what does it mean to be allowable, reasonable, and appropriate? I copied and pasted because I wasn't sure, and now we have it here. 200.4 for reasonable cost. A cost is reasonable if, in its nature and amount, it does not exceed which would be incurred by a product prudent person under the circumstances. In other words, if you have to buy some furniture, you're not buying the most expensive leather furniture. You're looking at what would you have purchased if you just had a small budget. It must be appropriate and reasonable. Whether the cost is for the type general recognized or ordinary or necessary for the operation of the program, the non-federal entity, or proper and efficient performance of the federal award. You must make sure that this is something that will be in good market price for corporate good service and in the geographical area. So when we do our disposition form, I think I have a copy and paste of it here. We're looking at what is the cost of this equipment. We're looking at the how much it's worth after it's been used. And then the other thing HUD tends to look at is, was this a reasonable purchase? But this does not only apply to equipment. An example that was provided to us from HUD is, if you are a case manager and you're riding with one of your clients to an interview and you decide to go for lunch, and you went to Applebee's and you purchased their lunch, and you cannot charge that to the grant because it was not an appropriate or reasonable or allowable cost. It sounded good, a good award after going to a job interview, but that's not something that you can do in that activity. Food is allowable cost, but going to Applebee's for a sit-down meal, was that reasonable and appropriate? And is it in the appropriate category? Food is only allowable under certain activities. So think about that when you're looking at certain purchases for your program. A universal requirement is that staff indirect costs and admin, ESG and ESG CV. MAC does not allow for direct admin costs, as you know. However, direct staff and admin staff that works with the grants by overseeing the grant and managing the grant, they can charge their time to that activity. Staff time must be documented appropriately and with signed timesheet. And you must make sure, does it line up? For example, if you're charging your admin staff who operate and manage all 4 of your programs, ESG rapid rehousing, ESG homeless prevention, ESG shelter, you have your program manager that manage all those programs, right? So you can't just charge them to one of the programs. You need to actually charge that manager, divide that time up to all those programs. And if you have multiple grants that manager works with, then it should be distributed among the other grants as well and not solely to ESG. Indirect costs, agencies must have appropriate policies in place to implement indirect costs. If you're not familiar with indirect costs, you might want to read up on it before testing it out. We do have some agencies that's been doing it for years. If you need more information, I will be happy to connect you to those agencies. Mississippi Home Corporation has just started working with indirect costs with ESG. So this is kind of new for us. Admin costs is not allowed for ESG once again, but it is allowed for HOCWA, but it's capped at 7%. So if you're a HOCWA agency, you do have that admin cost separated. However, you can allow for your case manager's time to be charged in different areas in the grant. Disposition form, I mentioned this earlier. You purchase equipment, it needs to be on this form. We talked about this in our first office hours. It is a form that's available on our website. When we come to monitor you, we will be requesting that you submit this form. So make sure you fill it out ahead of time. If you have purchase of anything over $5,000, that's going to require a more in-depth process that require with HUD involvement. So let's make sure you're clear on the price and also clear on how much it costs now due to the depreciation. You might have to research exactly, equipment depreciation cost. I'm not sure what the formula is on that, but it is something that's considered on the disposition form. When you do your internal review, I have a form that you can use to help you get through the process. This is the street outreach. Make sure you're reviewing your street outreach. You can use this checklist to help you determine if you are collecting appropriate documentation. All applicants in the HMIS street outreach program is included in HUD reporting and assumed eligible and will be subject to monitoring. Street outreach applicants must be unsheltered homeless. Street outreach is not for program outreach, okay? So you're not using street outreach to reach out to the homeless prevention population. You're not using street outreach to reach out to your rapid rehousing population who are homeless in a shelter. Street outreach is solely and only for reaching out to unsheltered homeless persons. So when we monitor your street outreach file, you don't have to have a file, but I need some type of verification that this person was unsheltered homeless whilst you were reaching out to them. Now, 99% of 50% of street outreach costs for most agencies are on staff, or outreach worker. They might not have files on someone, and that's fine. But if you are working with your COC, most likely, if you're doing street outreach, you're entering people into the coordinated entry system and also the street outreach system. So it needs to be somewhere that we can see who you're engaging. It can't be that you have street outreach dollars to do street outreach and you did street outreach and you engage 0 people. Someone needs to be there, or I need to have some type of verification that you engage someone. If you decide to engage them and purchase them some stuff, then we also need documentation for that, because as you know, the street outreach, there are some emergency supplies that you can purchase. We do encourage agencies, if you haven't used street outreach before, to consider using it, especially if you're a community that has a high unsheltered population. Because it will help move that population from unsheltered homelessness into sheltered homelessness if we have more people reaching out to them and offering services. The goal of street outreach is to identify and help encourage them to connect them to shelter and to housing. Okay? We don't force them into housing. But we're also not just going there, not doing nothing. We're offering them services, we're offering them housing. If they refuse, that's fine. But you're not just, it's actually an activity that leads to an outcome. I want to make sure that's clear. Shelter. All applicants in HMIS shelter program is included in HUD report, as I stated before. So shelter applicants must meet the category of homelessness. Number 1, literally homeless. That means they were on the streets, or they were in a shelter and you continue to keep them in a shelter, or fleeing domestic violence, okay? Now, the question came up before on one of my other calls. If someone was coming from housing and seeking shelter, do they qualify as homeless for shelter services? Yes. If they're calling you and they're saying that, hey, I'm getting kicked out tonight, they ready to change my locks, I need shelter services, can I guess? And they're asking you for shelter and you give them shelter. That night they're homeless, they have a sign-in sheet, you verify them as homeless, okay? If you're a domestic violence agency, if you're a children or homeless youth agency, sign-in sheets or whatever appropriate documentation you have is sufficient as homeless certification. If you're working with hotel, motels, you need to be collecting homeless certification on individuals. If you use your coordinated entry system, then a printout from coordinated entry where they were identified as homeless will be sufficient, and you won't need to get the homeless certification. But I will need to see that printout from coordinated entry that they were identified as homeless. So either or will be acceptable. Here is a checklist for emergency shelter, a temporary emergency shelter, to help you go through your review and make sure that your program has the appropriate services. ESGCV had special activities that were allowed, unique activities we have labeled here. So if you did some of these unique things, like cell phone purchases or vaccines or things like that, make sure you identify which clients receive those special activities. Rapid rehousing. Once again, if they're in the rapid rehousing program in HMIS, it's because you've identified them as homeless and they are counted on our reports to HUD and will be subject to monitoring. Rapid rehousing applicants must meet category of literally homeless, just like with shelter. With ESG-CV, it was way more things that we could do. So depending on which files that you are monitoring, make sure you identify what all services were provided under rapid rehousing. If you're using waivers and you're not sure where the waivers apply, feel free to reach out to me. We had several waivers that apply to rapid rehousing and the ESG-CV, but some of those waivers were allowed under annual ESG as mega waivers, okay? For example, the fair market rent. The fair market rent waiver was allowed under ESG-CV, but under annual ESG mega waiver, it was allowed until I think March of 2022. If you need more clarification with that, feel free to reach out to me. Rapid rehousing continues. So first page is actually things you're probably familiar with, right? Intake and assessment, documentation of homelessness, termination or referral form, case management notes. But here are some things that you may not be more familiar with. Lease agreement, we know about that, but are we considering VAWA? As of 2021, HUD has been pushing VAWA notification. What that means for non-DP agency is that if you have someone in your program in rapid rehousing or homeless prevention, they have to sign off on this notification, verifying that they know, you inform them that if they are experience domestic violence, they won't be terminated off the program because of that incident. Instead, they'll be allowed to keep their voucher and be housed somewhere else, and you have a housing plan for them. If you don't have VAWA in your policies and procedures yet, you need to add it to your policy and procedure before I get there. If you're not sure what to add, go to our program manual on our website. I have a whole section on VAWA. Copy, paste it, put in your program procedures. Print out the form, get your clients to sign it, get your case manager to sign it, add it to your files. Homeless prevention. Once again, if they're in homeless prevention, it's because you have determined that they qualify for homeless prevention. And therefore, they're an HMIS and we would expect appropriate documentation. If you're in homeless prevention, that means you're at risk of becoming homeless. Your income is 30% or less. If you're ESG-CV, because of the waiver, we are 50% or less. If you're working ESG and ESG-CV at the same time, make sure you document which clients belong where, even though clients could move from ESG-CV to ESG, but if their income was 50%, you want to make sure it's clear which program they belong to. Homeless prevention applicants must verify that they have no resource or support and will be homeless. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that we need a statement from them or a statement from the case manager. You saying that you can't pay your bills is not enough. I can say I can't pay my bills and have money inside a savings account. We need verification. We need bank statements. We need statements from the individual if they don't have bank statement. We need more information to verify they have no other resources. They burned bridges with their family or friends, or it's an overcrowded situation, and they will become homeless. People who fall in that category were going to be under the homeless definition. We have category 2, imminent risk, or under and category 4, attempting to flee domestic violence, okay? That's under the homeless definition. Under the homeless prevention definition, we have category 1 that can range from you in a hotel, paying for it by yourself, to also living with someone else that you wasn't living with before, someone you moved into, or overcrowding. There's a whole lot of different definitions that someone can qualify for. and it's fine, but you must make sure and confirm that this person will become homeless if you don't intervene, okay? Overcrowding situation is very tricky. Sometimes a love eviction may help in overcrowded situation. If you're working with a family, maybe there's a family of 7 in a 3-bedroom unit, they're about to lose their HUD voucher, or the family can't continue to live in certain circumstances. Something in writing from the family would help um, qualify them for this program. We have a checklist here that they can go by. We also, once again, have unique activities under ESGCV. If you are paying for those activities, make sure you identify that. Especially when it comes to landlord incentives, if you're using that attached to a client, make sure you identify that. The employment program, I know some agencies were using that. Make sure you identify which clients receive those services. And you have to verify, even before the services was received, that they were eligible for the program. Homeless prevention, once again, we have VAWA here because HUD is looking at ways to ensure that these individuals can continue to receive services if they're in a domestic violence, stalking, human trafficking situation. HMIS. So HMIS funds are used to pay for the use and access to collect and report data in HMIS. COCs who are HMIS leads sometimes charge for storing is the word. I don't know why I spelled it wrong. Data in the system. HMIS expenses is described as to the extent necessary in the CBD notice. So to the extent necessary, usually your HMIS person sends you a charge of how much it costs to access or receive services through that system. Prepare yourself for monitoring. Go and download these tools. If you go on our website under specialized federal programs, specialized housing, ESG, you will see monitoring tools. Download those tools, adopt them to your program, and go through your client files. Just doing that is not enough. This checklist will only help you get through the client files. There are other things that you need to make sure you have in place. And here we go. It's the additional monitoring tools. This is the CPD monitoring handbook. If HUD or OIG comes to your agency, this is the form they will be using when we monitor your policies and procedures and your processes. This is the form that we are using. So please go to the CBD monitoring handbook. If you haven't used it before, here is the link. Download the handbook for ESG and for ESG CV because there's the special waivers in there, and make sure your stuff are in line. In the handbook, it goes through the same things I went through for the program, but also talks about lead inspection. It talks about shelter inspection. It talks about how you should manage your financial policy and procedure, paying landlords, and what time frame should you pay landlords. It looks at your staff timesheet. Everything in there is subject for monitoring and has specific I guess, grading tools on there that you can look at, and it tells you what it's looking for. Sometimes it's big, and I might open it up real quick. Let me open it up. I'm going to change my screen. Give me 1 second so you can see it real quick. In case you haven't looked at it before, I want you to see what you're getting into. One second. Can you all see, Vicky, can you all see the screen with the HUD monitoring tool? Vicky, me a quick yes or no. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So this is the way it has all of the HUD programs. So if you have multiple HUD programs, you can put it up on this. Here is the exhibits for ESG, all the way down here. If you click on one, it opens up into a Word document. Here it is. And I also suggest that you look up the regulations, because sometimes they shorten it here, but it's so much more to it. So read the regulations and make sure that you understand what it's asking. All right, let's go back to our slide. Okay. Finally, program policy and procedures. All agencies are required to have the following: a program policy and procedure manual. It must meet HUD and Mississippi Home Corporation regulations. ESG and ESG-CV policy and procedures must be clearly separated due to waivers. So if you have both programs and you have one manual, you need to separate which section is the waivers and how you implement those waivers. You must include your screening, approval, denial, appeal, housing, termination, and discharge process for your clients. Once again, your manual needs to include your screening process. If you're using the coordinated entry for screening, then put that. Your approval and denial process, your appeal process, if you deny someone, they need to have an option to appeal, your housing process, your termination process, that's a federal requirement, and your discharge process. These are just some of the things that I've identified here, but you will find in the CPD guidebook as a federal requirement. It must also have your process of reporting concerns. What that means is if a case manager is reviewing something and they have a concern, maybe they think the landlord is a fake. When I used to work in the field, you'll be surprised when clients can make up. They can make up some stuff. And the case manager have a way of reporting, whether it's to their direct supervisor or if this concern is about their supervisor, they have a way of reporting to someone else. So your way of reporting up. Fair and equal housing. Those policies need to be in there, and also see HUD monitoring tools for other things that should be included in your policy. Personnel policies, you need to include your drug-free workplace. If you did the ESG application, we had that on there. That should be in your personnel policies. Process for reporting concerns, once again, whistleblowing type policies. Fair and equal employment policies, and additional policies that you may have. See HUD notification for more insight on that. Your fiscal policies need to have oversight process, a process of reporting concerns again, and your budgets. Someone with lived experience must be involved in your policy making or board or your decisions, okay? When you write your policies, when you develop your board, or when you make your program decisions, someone lived experience must be a part. That's not a recommendation, that's a requirement by HUD for all of their similar programs. And finally, everything must line up. If I read your policy, and I see in your policy that you do not serve people past 3 months, and I see you paying rent on someone for 6 months, that's a concern that you brought on because you did not follow your own internal policies. Federal policies allows us to serve for 24 months, but if you decide to limit your program to 3 months and yet someone was special enough to get 6 months, that's a concern. So make sure everything lines up. Other example, we may ask for your organizational chart. If I see someone on your organizational chart that is working for Hawkwa but charged 100% to ESG, that's a concern. Your stuff is not lining up. So update your stuff. If your things need to be updated and you forgot to update it since 2020, this is the time to do that before we come and do your monitoring. All right, Ms. Faye will go over the closeout process. Faye, do you want me to pull up the Excel or do you want me to go slide by slide?
It'd probably be better to just go through the document.
All right, I'm gonna put it up, share my screen.
Okay.
Oh, give me a second, because I need to escape that.
And while she's doing that, hello, everyone. It's good to see you all again. I know you all are overwhelmed right about now, so I'm going to make mine short and sweet. So you all can say, okay, I don't know if I signed up for the right program or not, but we want to make sure that HUD get everything that they're supposed to get. And by providing these office hours is really giving you all the opportunity to learn more about the program and what's required. So it sounds like it's a lot of work, but I think once you get in the groove, it all just kind of flows, all together.
Faye, I think I
Mm.
have too much things open.
Okay,
See if you can open it on your end and share your screen because my computer decided it doesn't want to work anymore.
Share. You know, I don't be knowing how to do this stuff.
Oh, that's fine. I got it.
You got it?
It just took a while. I
All
think my
right.
computer is just more memory probably.
Oh,
I'll share my screen too. There we go.
okay.
All right. Let me
All
go to the
right.
work
If you
introduction.
go back one more to the instructions. I think it's one more before that. Okay. It's really self-explanatory. This is a document that we use to close out your program. This is once you've expended all of your funds. You get awarded a certain amount of funds. And of course, throughout the year, we ask you for information for your CAPER and things like that. Those are things that we need for our reporting period. However, the closeout is once you have expended all of your funds for what you have been awarded for. So this has the instructions on how to do it, but we just kind of go through it right quick. You have the closeout procedures. Of course, this is a requirement that we require of each of the people that we award funds to. The next tab, and I think this will be on the website, right, tomorrow? Each one of the instructions for completing the closeout, if you notice, you have the links, and each one of the links will take you directly to each one of the other tabs. You have the recipient closeout checklist. Of course, the purpose of the checklist is to make sure that you've completed all the parts of the program. And when you submit it to us, you're letting us know that I've included all of these documents. If you would click on the closeout checklist tomorrow, you will see when you submit it to us, you will let us know what you've enclosed, what you'll be submitting separately, anything that was you weren't able to finish, you're just going to mark it on there. When you put your name in the recipient area up there at the top, it should populate to all the other pages. So if we go to the next tab, your certificate of completion. Now, this is the important here. You will be entering your original award amount, and you will be entering it based on the activity and how much you had in each activity. You will put in what the amount was budgeted in your, for example, for shelter, and if you had any, how much you expended. You will also enter for the match part, you'll enter that in the second column, the columns H, I, J, and all of that. You will enter your match in that section. Because once we get to the end of it, your match and what you were awarded should come out to be the total amount of your ESG award amount. If you scroll down a little bit on that page, once you enter all your information in each one of the activities, it's going to total it for you at the bottom. If you had any deobligation of funds, you would enter that in that section. If you had anything that you was unsettled or that you didn't complete, then all of that would be entered here on this particular page. And on the next page, on the next tab, your ESG report. This report provides, this is where you will provide all of the beneficiaries that you served for each of the activities listed, your homelessness prevention, your rapid rehousing, and your shelter. And then, of course, you will also include the special population served. Those numbers there can be duplicated, but not the ones up at the under the household information. Those are not duplicated numbers, but the numbers under the special population served, because you can have a veteran, but they could also be a domestic violence participant as well, or chronically homeless, but those numbers can be duplicated. So don't hesitate to include whatever area they fell in under the special populations served. Scroll down just a little bit more on that one. Where you have your shelter utilization. Some of you are familiar with that, especially those of you who have shelters, where you complete that. But this is for the full contract year, or whether it's be extended or however it is. This is for you to include all of the beneficiaries, that you served within this contract year or this program year, whether it be, if it's in 2021, if you're closing out program year 2021, we need to know the data for 2021. If you're closing it out for 2022, but we want to do it for the entire program year that you have the funds for. And of course, at the bottom, it gives you space to put in the amount of funding that you had under the ESG expenditures, how much you expended for homelessness prevention, how much you expended for rapid rehousing, and of course, your expenditures for shelter and your other grant expenditures. Some of this information it should be pretty easy for some of you because of your on your request for cash. We this information, you're doing that in your request for cash on your CAPER page. So some of that you'll be able to gather from there, but it's going to be for the whole program year. And you also include your match source. All right, I think on the next page, we got the agreement to close out. This document here, this is the one that you will be signing off on. This is where you're telling us that to the best of your ability, you have provided all of the information that we require for the closeout, and it is true to the best of your ability. If there was anything that you was not able to do, we need to know about that. If it's someone that you were not able to serve, if you will scroll down on that page tomorrow, they can see that each section, the certificate of recipient's compliance, keep scrolling. You got your general statement of compliance, your outstanding claimants list. If there was anybody that you were not able to serve, or if you have some issues where it was not something that was outstanding that you was not able to provide, we would like to know about that. And then there's an actual tab for that. But this page here is where you will sign off on saying that everything that we've provided for you is in compliance with the grant, and is to the best of your ability, best of your knowledge, everything is true and in compliance. The outstanding claimant page, that's just if you had something that didn't fit, or if you needed to report to us anything that was outstanding, you would put that there. If you purchased any inventory or had any program income, you're required to list it as well. Of course, you see the inventory and program, you have a section for real estate, and then of course you have a section for equipment. We don't really do a lot of purchasing or acquiring real estate, but there are things that you purchase for your shelter or for your to carry out the program. So if you would, it lists those things that you purchase and you still have. Especially, and I think Tamara mentioned about over a certain amount, you're required to keep inventory of those things that you purchase with the federal dollars if it was over a certain amount. I think that's pretty much it. This document will be on our page on the website. And of course, if you have any questions or anything about it as you're completing it, I will be happy to assist you with that. And that's it for the closeout part. I think now we are open for questions. If you all have any questions that you want to ask about any of the things that Tamara shared with you, or any questions you may have about the closeout process.
Thank you, Ms. Fair. I was talking on a mute mic.
So this is Sarah Backby. I have a question about the VAWA forms.
Yes.
Is that meant between us and the client, or us and the landlords?
Clients. And so if you look at let me pull up the form real quick. Now, there is a part that HUD is asking for landlords to sign on their lease, but if landlords are not wanting to work, there is a form specifically for clients to sign. But as I pull up the form, I'm gonna see if someone else has another question, because it will take a second for me to pull the form up. I gotta go to our website.
Okay.
Any other questions when I pull this form? Okay, just give me a second, I'll pull the form. No questions?
I have some questions.
Sure.
This is Alicia Carter.
Yes.
Okay, so the monitoring for our organization has already taken place, or will there be another one?
Your
And- and-
agency, yes, your monitoring has been taking place, but we have not done a closeout as yet. As I mentioned, maybe I mentioned on the mute mic, but it's not our intention to leave open, concerns. We work with the agencies to get things taken care of. And as of the last response with you, Ms. Carter, we received your response, and we're working through that process.
Okay, and so, but I still have time to
Yes.
turn in things?
Yes,
See?
ma'am, you still have time. Unless I send you a notice of non-compliance, you still have time to get things together that you may need to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I have it. Hold on, y'all. Okay, I'm gonna shoot. Oh, y'all can see my screen. Sorry. So this is the form from HUD. It does have on here internal name of housing provider, so your agency name, internal name of program or rental assistance, name of program rental assistance, And then this was a signature page, but it's mainly between the agency, at least the one that we have in our policies right now is between the agency and the tenant, not the landlord. So we're not going to kick someone out of our ESG program if they are experience stalking, domestic violence, or anything that's protected under VAWA. They still have access to our programs, and we will work with them to relocate if needed. And additional information, there's no cap on how much times we can do deposits. So if you're working with a family that need to be relocated and you put deposits down on the property, you can move them somewhere else safe if that need to happen. Any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. So you're saying that this form should be included with those ESG application forms?
Yes, as of 2021, VAWA forms must be included with your application forms. This is not for the landlord, this is for your agency and for the individual who's in your program.
Okay.
And you could go on our policy and procedure manual, but I think signature page is cut off, so you could also Google the VAWA form and get that information. Any other questions? All right, I'm assuming you're just excited and waiting for us to come and show up to your door. No, Nikita White. If you want your policies and procedures to be reviewed before we reach there, feel free to throw it to us. I must admit, we've been very busy with our capers and our closeouts, but as of the 1st of October, we'll have more time to look at that. So if you want to see your policies, I know some of y'all was waiting on us to review it. I know Barbara County we're working with. If you all needed to review your policies, feel free to shoot it to us. We have completed some agencies before, and we're not that bad, right? From the agencies who we did. I hope not. But it's not our intention to leave findings out there, right? So if anything can be remedied, we want to do that, especially before any other monitors come to you. We want to work with you to fix things. But there are some things that we may not be able to fix, that we will walk with you through the next steps that you need to take at your agency level. If you have no other questions or concerns, I was going to end this training. This will be available on our website. Yes.
I do have a question. Okay, so since we've been monitored, I don't need to send you the policies again, or I do need to send them to you?
You already sent us your policies. If we had a problem with your policies that you would like to update for future activities, feel free to do that. But I don't think we listed that specifically, except for the very first time we monitor you. But I don't think we listed that on your second monitoring visit.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
But for agencies, we haven't seen this yet. If y'all wanted to take a quick peek at your policies before we head up there, feel free to shoot that over to us before we come there. If you have questions that you want to ask us offline, maybe some concerns you're worried about, feel free to give us a call. I'd rather get before we get there, because once we get there, we're in that monitoring process. If it's identified, it'll be identified on our report. So if you think you might be somewhere, you're not sure, do the checklist, do your internal monitorings, and reach out to us. And look to see us soon. Thank you all so much for your time, and we will be having office hours again next month. The topic will be shoot to you all soon, and go on our website, pull down the forms, but look at the CBT guide, the CPD guidebook. If HUD comes to your office, they are going by that guidebook, so you need to be familiar with all those questions. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Hey, Tamar,
Yes.
can I ask you something whenever everybody else leaves? Miss Faye, you can stay.
Sure. Anyone else?
Hey, Miss Vicky. Miss Vicky, she can stay also. Hey, Miss Vicky. You're muted, Miss Vicky.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing? Listen, y'all.
Hold on, let me end the meeting so I can
Okay.
stop recording. But I think I can end it while I was leaving. Let me see. Do you want to look at no? Can I stop? How can I stop recording? Maybe.
Don't ask me. I'm not,
It's
I'm young, old.
a way. It's a way. Hold on.
I think you just hit the little
Yes, I
red
found
button
it.
up there.
I found it.